Hello, welcome to today's today's webinar. This is a webinar about testing XPages with a pilot project, the essentials. Our webinar is presented today by Venkatesh Krishnamoorthy and Gayathri Vishwanathan, and they are from Maarga Systems. Their website is listed there below. Before we begin, I just want to remind you that if you do have questions, you can go ahead and type the questions into your go-to webinar panel on the right-hand side of your screen. It may have automatically collapsed. There should be a red arrow to allow you, or a green arrow to let you expand that. And you can type in your questions as we go along, and then at the end of their presentation, we can go ahead and have a question and answer session. So again, thank you for attending today. I'm going to now turn the time over to Venkatesh and allow him to do his introduction and to present us with today's webinar. Thank you very much. Venkatesh, I'm now switching this screen over to you.
Great. Thanks, Scott, and hello, everyone. Thanks for taking this time and joining us. The reason we are doing this webinar today is, let me just check if my screen is on.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay. Okay, great. So the reason we are doing this webinar is change can be hard, right? Any change, this is a favorite quote of mine from the British novelist Arnold Bennett. Any change, even a change for the better, is always accompanied by drawbacks and discomforts. And changing from Lotus Notes-based, client-based infrastructure to XPages is a change. And in the IT function, all of us know how important it is to take care of change management. If you read the book Switch by Chip and Dan Heath, they talk a lot about a learning phase, the importance of having a learning phase for new initiatives, somewhere between the initial concept and a full-blown strategy, and a time for purposeful time to test how the initiative is panning out before rolling it out fully. And that's what a pilot is, right? A pilot is not just an execution exercise, it's also a selling exercise. It's as much of a sales job as it is an execution job. And that's the context, or like the basis for this webinar. We're going to be two of us presenting. Both of us are from Maarga Systems. We're a software services firm with deep Lotus expertise, more than 55 experts on the Lotus platform. We have operations out of New York metro area, in Iselin, New Jersey, and in Chennai, India. And I am Venkatesh Krishnamoorthy, called Venki Krishnamoorthy normally. And my expertise is typically consulting, driving effectiveness in IT organizations and team, and value alignment between our teams and the customer's IT requirements. And I have along with me Gayathri Vishwanathan, who's the Chief Operating Officer of Maarga. And let me just hand it over to her for a quick introduction.
Hi everyone, really glad to meet you all virtually. I'm called Guy, a little easier on the words to hear and speak. I have a lot of experience with Lotus Domino, about 15 years now, and for the last probably about 4 years we've been pretty much working on the XPages platform, bringing its technology to customers. And in this webinar, I am bringing in my process, technology, and solutioning expertise to give that flavor towards the pilot.
Okay, and just as a piece of information, the recording of this webinar will be available both at notescode.com and at the Maarga Systems site. And any resources we are referring to will be available both at the site as well as in any handouts we'll give at the end of this webinar. So moving on to an overview of what we're planning to cover today, we start off with the context. I mean, how did we get here? When we are looking at a pilot, there's likely a process that we've been through, either explicitly or implicitly, that's kind of looked at XPages as one of the options, or the option that we want to pursue. And how did we get here? So we'll set the context first. we'll have an overview of XPages as a technology and as a paradigm. And we look at a bit of reasons as to why a pilot makes sense. And this we look at from two perspectives. One from the perspective of business and another from the perspective of technology. Then we'll go to the essential steps part, and this is the meat of the presentation. This is something of a framework that should give a reasonable head start for anyone who is interested in structuring and carrying out a pilot exercise. At the end of the presentation, we'll have a question and answer session. As Scott said, there is an ability for you to key in questions, and we'll take those questions and answer them. So moving on, I'd like to start with a poll. And Scott, if you can bring up the first poll. This is about what is your organization doing about XPages, and there are 5 options there. And the last one is not applicable. So if you can pull up the poll, Scott.
Okay. The poll will now launch, and everyone can now vote. We'll give us a couple minutes to allow you to get some voting in for the poll. Again, the question is, what is your organization doing about XPages? We're already at 70% voting. All right. 5 more seconds, and then we'll close the poll. Looks like we're ready to go here. Okay, I'm going to close the poll, and I'll share it with everyone. The results are 15% of us are doing nothing, 65% exploring, and 19% piloting. Excellent.
Right. Great. And that's kind of consistent with a similar kind of a poll that we did a little while back when we ran another webinar like this. So we see a lot of organizations giving it some time and then looking at the technology, getting familiar with it, as well as exploring the value of it. So, as I said, let me start off with the context that we have even before we plunge into the pilot and look at XPages specifically. XPages is only one of the many options that we have, and quite often this is not very clearly discussed, or it's discussed in silos. I just want to bring this out on this slide. Depending on what our goals are, it could be XPages that makes sense for an organization, or it could be something that's not so tied back to the dominant architecture, like say a jQuery-based front end with a lot of JSON for web enabling a dominant application, and sometimes it might just make sense to buy a commercial off-the-shelf application for some apps. So it's important that we kind of start off understanding what is the goal. Why is it that we are looking at this entire XPages and piloting XPages? And quite often the goals that we hear are user demands for better user experience, better functionality, quite often user demands for mobility, and reducing client license costs. Some amount of political heat around Lotus Notes and the desirability of Lotus Notes, and wanting to make Lotus Notes look and feel good. And more aligned to the business are business agility, moving to the cloud, and reasons like that. So we need to be very clear as to what the reasons are we are looking at XPages as a technology. Because if we go on and do a pilot without knowing our reasons for doing this very clearly and having alignment all through the IT organization and the broader organization, it leads to this phenomenon of busyness is laziness, right? We end up doing a pilot, but the outcome of it is not going to satisfy anyone. We're not going to be able to implement whatever we see. So I know a lot of us, it's not relevant. It's relevant only for a few organizations, but it's important to step back at this time and take a look at, hey, why is it that we are doing it? And of course, like a pilot is just one step in the whole thing. Ideally, you need a complete roadmap, and our roadmap is called XMAP, XPages Migration Approach and Plan. and we have a visual guide around it. Some of you who have been to Lotus here might have taken it the physical printout of the poster, and it's available for download also. We'll give you links later. So pilot is just one part of it. Starting from assessment and prioritization of the portfolio of application all the way to detailed rollout and retirement of the traditional clients, there's a bigger roadmap that's needed. So that's the context that I want to lay as we go into the next step, and which is around just a quick overview of XPages technology, a recap of sorts, and I'll just have Gayathri take over for that.
Thanks, Venki. Just a very quick recap. As we did see, most of you are already in the exploratory phase or already piloting with XPages. Very likely you know what it is, but just in case you don't, XPages was first introduced with version 8.5 of Lotus Domino. It's a complete web development framework. It was, even when it was introduced, it had a complete integrated IDE and built on top of Eclipse as a platform. And it kind of brought in some of the key things which were missing in the original Domino, which is in original Domino and Lotus applications, typically the UI and the data were all very tightly coupled. This brought in the layer of difference. It's built on top of something called JSF, which is the Java Server Faces technology. It extends it, which means that this particular technology is what goes into things like JBoss and Oracle and IBM Rational, other technologies which are typically being used to build enterprise applications. And this came in as a technology that helps you build enterprise scale applications. Web 2.0 is kind of integrated into it. Things like what you see as, you change a value and then the entire thing refreshes with seamlessly is brought in as part of XPages directly. So that's what XPages brought in. And it's predominantly for web and mobile comparatively than the Notes client. So you can really build very, very slick looking and good looking applications, and which can also integrate with other backend systems like RDBMS very easily. And on screen you can just see some of the applications with modern looking UI. And moving on, also giving a developer's overview of XPages, and those were from a business side. But when you look at it from a developer's view, there are two words typically get used. XPages really refers to the runtime, which is part of the Domino server, which actually serves up the design element called an XPage. An XPage is actually an XML where you have visual components, it has markup languages, and it's completely with JavaScript. So you have access to the entire object model. You can manipulate it any different way you want. But the advantage, and it's a pretty significant advantage, is it's still built on top of the NSF. So the stuff that we are used to, things like replication, things like having documents that move backwards and forwards, things like being able to have a single template that refreshes multiple applications across server, all of that is still there. And since it's built on the J2EE platform, but a standard Domino developer, someone who's used to Lotus script, someone who's used a formula language, doesn't need to learn J2EE. At the same time, people who come in from that flavor, people who already know JavaScript, who already know J2EE, someone who knows Java very well, can also plunge into this pretty easily and start becoming very productive. So it's kind of a best of both worlds at this point in time.
Great. Moving on to a quick understanding of why do a pilot? And there's some good reasons, and I'd cover some business reasons for it before Gayathri covers some technical reasons. it gives us some dedicated time to test. All of us are busy in the IT department. There's a lot of operational work that pulls us in. The bigger organizations or better organized organizations might clearly distinguish roles and responsibilities and create time for new initiatives. But it's important to define a separate project that gives us dedicated time to test significant technology like this. And it's a sandbox of sorts, right? So it allows you to play around with a limited portfolio of databases and applications with a limited impact on users, on infrastructure, and with a limited budget. If something goes wrong, it's contained, and we can correct it and not have a big impact to deal with. So one of the main reasons for a pilot is the sandbox, right? And the third thing is the possibility of learning from failures. If something does go wrong, it'll be muted, it's going to be limited, and it can be fixed before we proceed with the whole effort. At the same time, if something does go right very well, whatever we observe as working very well, we can amplify the success in the bigger project and project it. And it's a great way to win confidence of users and management. Quite often, making a business case is difficult, so when we do it on a small scale and test out things and prove it to the management that this does deliver the results the management is seeking, they're happy to provide more funds. Users, of course, when you get the right users excited about the pilot project and make it work for them, the word spreads around in the organization and in the user community that this is a great tool and everybody wants it. Particularly features like mobility, there's a lot of viral spread of this information among the user base, and that helps a lot. On the whole, it gives IT managers a perspective on usage-related issues to watch out in a bigger rollout. If we've been using Notes client-based applications for the most part, a significant paradigm shift going on to web and mobile, there might be significant user-related issues, usage-related issues. And it could be something to do with training, it could be something to do with support. Whatever it is, we need to watch out on those in the pilot before we go on for the bigger project.
Adding to what Venki said, from a business perspective, a pilot is also a very good way to kind of look at some of the technical challenges that you're likely to face. It starts off with as simple as restructuring the application, and there used to be, you have to kind of decide on what is the approach. If you're used to being a standard Lotus client applications based predominantly, then the web paradigm is very different, and the mobile paradigm is a totally different beast. So it needs to be looked at, and how you're going to approach it needs to be defined. For example, if we take the mobile, there are things like, you could go with a standard HTML browser-based application, which would open up in a mobile, or you could have a hybrid strategy, or you can go native. So you can actually have something like loaded up in your Apple Store, which people download, but it's accessing Domino data in the backend. But this decision needs to be taken, and taking it at a pilot is a much smaller, contained approach rather than bringing it over to the bigger project. The second aspect of it is this is a good chance to restructure the application. So stuff that we've all been used to, things like limiting the number of entry fields that are available for users. Now that's no longer there with XPages, so you can restructure. You can bring in the concepts of Ajax, concepts of something that's called in XPages called something called repeat control, which is basically allowing users to have multiple levels of input and providing that in a very visual manner, or having something like a single screen, but where people enter data, but ultimately in the back end it's going to go and sit into multiple areas. It's in one place I update, but then it automatically updates a whole bunch of different documents. It's possible, but it makes sense to think about it. How do you want to do it? And this is a good place to do that. The third area is optimization itself. Now again, if you're used to being a Notes client predominant organization, the way the server needs to be tuned for a web application is very different. And are you going to be optimizing for performance versus scalability? How many users are really likely to access this? And also to the level of, how can I reuse some of the business logic that I have? So it's not just optimization of the server parameters, it's also optimization of application parameters. What can I pull out and make it into a central, library? What kind of business logic that can be completely reused? How can I reuse some of the agents that I already have? Doesn't make sense to rewrite any of these. So it's a good place to think through some of these, have a clear idea about how it's going to be done, and then take it through to execution. So it's a good reason to pilot again.
Great. So those were the reasons that we broadly see people resonating with. Now here is the question to everyone, and Scott, it's time for the next poll, and this is around what are your reasons for considering a pilot? I know I have 7 reasons here, but Scott only has 5 in that poll. Scott, if you can pull it up, we can just run it, and it's a multiple choice poll. That means you can answer pick up as many reasons as you like.
Okay, the poll is now open. Again, you can select more than one item, and we do apologize. The GoToWebinar did limit us to 5 selections, so we did pull out the 5 common ones, the most common ones that we felt would be appropriate. All right, voting's coming along nicely. We're at half of the attendees have voted. And we'll give us 10 more seconds here. All right, I'm going to close the poll and show the results.
Okay, great. So I see the technical reasons in one sense are bigger than the business reasons, right? So deciding on the approach, I think that seems to be heavy on people's mind, and the ways in which we can optimize applications and restructure the logic that we have and package them, that seems to be big too. And so that's a good insight. I think we'll focus on those down the line also. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you. Okay, we're back to your screen, Venki.
Great. So moving on, we just had a look at the broad context from which we came, and a quick look at XPages as a technology, and business and technical reasons as to why to do pilot. Now we come to the meat of the presentation, which is around a framework and a set of steps that you can use to pilot effectively, and then we'll go to questions. So there's 5 steps here. There's actually a 6th step that we're missing out here, and these are defining the objectives, what is it that we're trying to achieve out of the pilot, planning the pilot itself, and communication as a separate step by itself, and executing the pilot, and closing out the pilot. And the final step that I've left out here is transitioning out. So closing and transitioning can be considered one single step. So essentially these are the broad steps involved in doing a pilot, and we'll cover these one at a time. So the most important thing about a pilot is we need to be clear as to what is it that we seek to get answered at the end of the pilot. If we can be clear about it, the chances of success are much higher. So it's like what do I want answered at the end of this whole thing, and what knowledge will make me feel that I've succeeded in the pilot? That's the core thing, and it falls into a few categories, right? How do we establish the business case, not just for the pilot but for the entire conversion? There are a few business cases that we can test out. If we're testing out mobility, for example, in a famous study that the makers of BlackBerry Research in Motion did a little while back, you know, mobile-enabled workflows were up to 38 times faster than workflows that are not mobile-enabled. So that's a significant savings. In a lot of business processes, 38% time saving can be absolutely phenomenal, right? So what are those business cases which can, you know, make it strong? So that can be one of the things that we can decide at the objectives part of the pilot. Right? So mobility, user experience, this whole paradigm of bring your own devices and that comes along with mobility, and user satisfaction. So what are the dimensions around returns and business case that that we need to look for is one of the things that we need to define. And we need to see what are the risks and how do we surface them. That's another objective. That's another part of the objective of the pilot. So if we can be clear about what are the risks, you know, are there any significant business operations risk? Is there something that can disrupt my normal business from happening by changing over to this technology? That's something to know right here. And issues related to IT security. For the most part, XPages model is very much like the Notes model, but we are talking about a lot more web and mobile, and there could be issues at the security level, and we need to surface those risks. That's another part of the objective. The third thing is validating time and effort. We saw that in the poll it was around approach, and a lot around the approaches around time and effort. How much time will this thing take? And it was around, hey, it used to be always a very easy and a simple thing for me to develop Notes client applications. But how much time does this whole XPages thing take? Is one of the most common questions that we find customers have on their mind. How long will it take to roll out the converted application? The complexities of user training and help desk and support training. And it's not exactly the same as rolling out additional Notes workflows. These workflows might have existed, but we might choose to do some changes in user experience that might need a significant preparation of the users before we can roll it out effectively. So validating the time and effort and the cost. How much will it cost? What is the whole budget like? These are questions that can be tested at the pilot. So we can get a good sense of the cost that we incur to do a typical project, and from that we can extrapolate for the bigger portfolio. And the other thing is, just a minute here, I seem to have. The other thing is validating the resource requirements, and who do we need, and time of my IT administrators do I need, and do I need effort from my subject matter experts for this migration effort? That's often critical, right? Quite often the bottleneck is testing. The bottleneck is understanding what the business logic is, and does a new application reproduce like the same experience that the old application was giving. And and also what skilling do my developers need for this, and do we have the in-house resources for supporting this? Do we need to do some training? What kind of training? Who can be groomed to take up this role, and who's not going to fit into this kind of a paradigm? So, and how much effort from my end users and my business owners and champions? All those things are critical things to kind of look out for and define as objectives. And finally, validating the fit, which is all around. Hey, is this the technology for me? Is XPages applicable in our situation? How will it work with our mobile strategy? How will it work with our cloud strategy? Those are things that we want to get answered, and these are things that need to clearly come out as objectives. Now, this is not necessarily a very prolonged effort, but it's something that's going to need a lot of perspective and the right kind of people thinking through this, and this can make a significant difference in how the pilot proceeds. The second step is around planning the pilot itself. What's and getting the plans approved, which is like the effort that's involved and the budget that's involved in rolling out the pilot, and the schedule for the pilot, everything from development to rollout to user training, everything. And communication, and there's a separate slide on communication, because it's at the core of getting it to be a success. But what do we communicate? How do we communicate? So planning that out is definitely part of the planning activity, and we need to figure out if there is any changes in infrastructure that's needed. If we go significantly mobile or web-based, there is going to be some part of our telecom partners infrastructure that needs to be thought through. And if it's web-based, there might be additional servers or different servers, or moving off some load between servers. There's this whole X-Work server as a possibility for companies that are seriously considering XPages, and that gives them the ability to put rather powerful servers at relatively inexpensive. It's a $2,000 a year price point for 4 applications. So some of the bigger applications can get some powerful hardware without worrying about IBM's PVO norms. So stuff around infrastructure and things like that. So who's going to contribute? From business owners, the key champions that we want to go with for the pilot, and the end users, what level of contribution and testing we'll need from them. The IT administrators and the security team is another stakeholder group that we need to take care of, and developers and the support team, most important, because it's a change in user experience and behavior. And besides this, hey, if something does go wrong, how do we gracefully recover from it? Having a plan B for keeping going with the modernization effort without coming to a complete stop. So those are all elements of a good plan. And in terms of the next step is, of course, to communicate, and this can't be overstated. So we need to be clear about who do we need to communicate with, and there is multiple stakeholders here, and the frequency of communication, it needs to be appropriate. It needs to, of course, we have some very good methods available right now as modes of communication. You have blogs and wikis, which can be significantly used to give a lot of information about what is happening on a project without overcrowding people's attention span and bandwidth. So we're increasingly finding that internal product owners are also blogging about details of their blog, and they find that some interested users are very actively participating in the blogs and wikis, and that's useful information and feedback back to the product developers. And the content that they're going to communicate, and setting the expectation that hey, this is a pilot, things will be a little rough at times, and when they do not work as expected, the kind of steps that we are taking to recover from it. All those are important parts of communicating. So, and of course, then it is executing and getting the feedback, the bulk of what the pilot effort is from an effort perspective.
That's right. Once you have those, and as Venki said, it's not as if you need to kind of spend an inordinate amount of time doing the planning or setting the goals and things like that, but it's very important that those steps be done so that it kind of directs and guides this entire specific execution phase. Now, one of the first things that we would need to do is kind of define and design. What I mean by that is, when you'll have, it's a good chance when you do the pilot, and here what we are doing is taking an existing application, bringing it over to XPages. So one of the first steps that can very well make a difference is to kind of, cut off the flab. Over time, applications tend to become bigger, They have a lot of use cases that probably are no longer relevant. So cutting some of those obsolete use cases off, it does two things. One, makes the XPages or the new application much sleeker, more relevant, and at the same time it cuts down on the amount of time and effort that you need to bring it over as well. So for example, one of the things is let's say you have configurations and things like that. Now some of those need not be brought into a web paradigm at all. Probably it's just one administrator who goes in there and sets it up probably once a year, or it's been done and doesn't get touched again except after the rollout. In which case that really is not a use case that needs to be brought over to the XPages paradigm. So the first step is to define that. The second is, again as I said, the web paradigm is different, the mobile paradigm is different. So trying to kind of come up with what are those use cases you want in these two different paradigms. Let's take an example of a leave management system. On the mobile, you really do not need all the use cases. You probably just need, for the standard a user, the only ability to create a new vacation request or to cancel an existing request that they've already taken. For a manager, it may be more relevant to just see who in my department is not going to be at work today and add a new functionality from their mobile to be able to reach out to them either through an email or a phone call if there is something urgent that needs to be taken care of. That kind of a functionality definition, taking into consideration what the views are going to be, is very, very important. It's also important to kind of take some time at this point in time, especially during your pilot, to define the user experience. So in XPages, there's this concept of themes, which is like you define once all the look and feel elements and things like that, and then it can be reused over and over again with just minor modifications. So taking a little bit of time upfront to define this, make things happen, gives a long leverage down the line as well. So once you've done the define and design, then you can move on to the development phase. Now with XPages, there are a couple of very important things. One is to kind of try and reuse as much of your business logic as possible. See, for example, if you have a CRM application that you want to bring over using XPages, you really do not want to kind of recreate all the business logic that goes into your lead management, or maybe like, how you incentivize people and things like that. They are already there, and if they have been developed using standardized script libraries and things like that, a lot of it can be reused. Now if that's not, it might even then make some sense to kind of look into it, put together a quick process by which all that is already there is segregated into script libraries or standardized agents, which can then be reused. And it makes sense to do that rather than just jump in and say, okay, I'll just redevelop everything into the standard server-side JavaScript or Java, whatever you choose. There are very standardized best practices available, both from perspective of performance management, in usability. There's something called a partial refresh that allows you to bring in an AJAX flavor into your application. There is ability to kind of, what we used to have as embedded views, and then you have to click on it to edit something. You can easily have a panel, close to what you see in Facebook. So you kind of update in one place and it just goes into your timeline and things like that. These are very easily developed using XPages. So thinking through that and bringing those best practices in place during development is definitely worthwhile. And this is also a time where you can look at some of the reusable controls. So when you pick the right kind of application to pilot, then you can even during the pilot, you can look at what kind of functionality there can be created as a reusable control. A very standard use case is an audit trail. Now, an audit trail, even normally, you would probably use it as a standard subform, and then bringing it over as a proper reusable control can then, be used across board when you're moving forward for the entire organization. The third part of it is testing. As Venki said, this is very important and it's probably the most challenging. Perspective. Bringing over, because you're coming down to the web, there are standardized methodologies and tools like Selenium that can be deployed, thought through, so that we can have a very well automated and well thought through testing, functionality testing. Having said that, there are additional steps to be done as well. Performance is important. People are used to, especially if your people are used to kind of replicating their applications onto your local notes client, they are used to very, very fast speeds. They're just doing things locally, and here it's a different paradigm. They're actually accessing the server. So making sure that the application is fast. Now again, there are good tools available, things called, there are tools called YSlow, Firebug in Firefox. These are tools that help you work with performance optimization of XPages applications. This is also the time to look at extension library. Hopefully most of you have heard of OpenNTF, and with the latest version 8.5.3, the extension library is a whole bunch of controls that IBM has brought into Domino and Lotus Notes itself, and it kind of like fast tracks some of the development processes very easily. The last one that I definitely want to stress on is, your existing data must be safe. You can't go ahead and mess with those stuff. And one of the areas in testing that you need to look at is making sure that data integrity is maintained. And these are especially for things like security fields. You would have readers fields, you would have authors fields, you may have like agents and backend functionality that depends upon specific data types. You don't want to mess with those. So making sure that these are done both from a unit testing level and also before moving to production, making sure all of these are covered is very, very important. Finally comes the deployment. So here, having a training plan on your internal support staff helps. Knowing that you're not going to have issues like, oh, my replication failed and this particular document is there in my local replica but not there in the server replica. Now you're going to not have such issues, but you may have different issues coming up because people are accessing using a browser. So having that thought out and planned out and trained helps ahead of time. Before putting it on the server, as I said earlier, looking through the fine-tuning options, things like the Java virtual machine size, the heap size, something called the XSP properties. Now these are well documented as well. Doing those makes a lot of difference to the speed and the user experience of a user accessing the XPages application. So, and also looking at, okay, today this is probably just one application or just one set of databases that you are doing as a pilot and rolling it out. Having a thought process as to when you're going to roll out the next 30, how is it going to affect, is a good time. Now is a good time to think about it and start planning through that and looking at your server from that perspective. The other aspect is, once this is available, you could also in a limited way probably try to put it on the cloud, maybe on Amazon or a private cloud, and try that out, because this could take you towards the cloud strategy as well.
And once we're done executing, of course, it's important to get feedback on how the whole thing went. And it's surprising how little feedback is obtained and how it remains fairly informal. It's possible to obtain quantitative as well as qualitative feedback. I think it's important to survey everybody who's using the application as well as everybody who's part of the stakeholder, both in a survey kind of a format. There are so many tools that's available. There are there are hosted services. There is Lotus Notes-based tools, as well as there is open source stuff on how to do good surveys. Just ensuring that you get to hear the voice of everyone who had a chance to experience it, as well as qualitative feedback, which is going to a few people and sitting down with them and understanding how the whole experience was, what they liked, what wasn't flowing smoothly. It'll really be very important, because this whole thing, if it's corrected, can lead to significantly better experience for a bigger set of people in your whole organization. So I can't overstress the importance of feedback, both qualitative and quantitative. It's best practice to get quantitative feedback and record it, and it's a good CYA, right? As well as it's a great way of finding out what is working, what is not. So it's time all of us in IT departments start thinking of ourselves as providing service to a customer and having that customer service orientation, and getting feedback is a key part of it. So the final step, of course, is to close out the pilot. And here we need to loop back and go back to what our original objectives were. What is it that we set out to to test through the pilot, from validating business case related information to surfacing risks and validating effort and time involved and the fit of the solution. So we need to go back and revisit those questions and fill in the answers and document them. And it's important to have an internal discussion in the IT team, as well as with the management and the users on what we find. And of course, as I said, an extension of this is to transition out to the bigger project. And if assuming the pilot turns out to be successful, and we get a reasonable business case out of it, and people feel confident moving forward, it's time to roll in these learnings, as well as the assets that we've developed into the larger project, and that would be the basis for a significantly successful rollout for the entire organization. So that's it. A brief conceptual outline of how to do a project, a pilot project, and now we're open for questions. Scott.
Okay, great. If anyone does have a question for either Venki or Gay, just just go ahead and type it into the question panel, and I'll ask them the question. Let me just open up the. All right. Do have a couple of questions already. Excellent. One question is what is the best XPages pilot you have done so far?
I think I'll take that question. So for us, the best pilot that was to kind of take a small portion of a very large enterprise product. It was a CRM. We took one portion of it called the account manager, and even within that, we took one portion called the editability. We wanted to be able to create a new opportunity and then take it through its workflow. And we brought that over both to the web and the iPad over a period of about 3 months. In that, primarily, we focused on these areas. So we wanted to, it had a lot of complex business logic. We wanted to make sure that we reuse as much of it. And the second part of it was to kind of give it a good flavor on the iPad, enabling users to kind of see opportunities, and then one of the key things they would do is just quickly update status. So we first brought over just the readability on the iPad and just to be able to update the status much before we brought in editability of an opportunity. So that was a good pilot for us. We kind of learned a lot about it, and then we were able to bring that over to the customers.
And I'll add a little bit to this. The context of this whole engagement is that this customer that we did this pilot for is actually an independent software vendor, and this is a Lotus Notespace product, um, and that's being taken to XPages. So a product that's deployed in multiple environments is a lot more complex than a custom application, and the complexity that we had to encounter and the kind of trade-offs that we had to make and the design decisions we took were all driven by that complexity. So this is one piece of code that runs in nearly 100 different environments. And also in a software as a service multi-tenant kind of a mode also. So this was a complex engagement. It was a very good pilot.
Excellent. Okay. The next question is, are most pilots, or what percentage of pilots would be geared towards mobile applications or mobilizing notes applications?
We are finding that increasingly there is a lot of mobile interest. There's people who have not gone ahead and web enabled completely. So there's a combination of mobile and web we're seeing a lot, but mobile kind of taking off in a significant way. So I think in just about every pilot that we are encountering, we are assisting our customers with mobile is a component. And when I say mobile, it is at times a simple mobile of just a HTML5 front end which can run in a mobile with just a mobile CSS. And quite often it goes to a phone gap or a titanium kind of native application on multiple platforms and Blackberries and Androids and iOS together. It quite often the demand is for that also. Incidentally, we are coming up with a white paper on mobilizing Lotus applications that's due out next month, and we're hoping to have a webinar on that also. There's a lot more info we're planning to give on mobility and the kind of design patterns that we see around mobilizing Lotus applications.
Excellent. Can you name some of the tools that you mentioned? Or can you, again, name some of those tools that you would, I think Gay was talking about that.
Yeah, sure. For testing, I talked about Selenium. It's a tool that helps automate test cases, especially from a web paradigm. It's a very good tool that allows you to set up some test cases and repeatedly run them with different versions. And it also provides you with ability to run them on different browsers, which is very, very important, especially if different users have their own favorites, with Google Chrome and Firefox becoming most popular these days. The second tool, the other two tools I mentioned were for the performance testing of applications. So YSlow, the letter Y, SLOW, is a good tool for that. Firebug, that is a free add-on to Firefox, is also very good. On the OpenNTF side, there is something called an XPages toolbox. That's an add-on profiler kind of application that you can put on your Domino server that helps you look at different parts of your XPages application with a performance overview. Those are good tools, especially for performance testing. And the extension library from you can look it up in 853, or if you have a lower version than that, it is available on the OpenNTF. It's a very good toolkit which enables much faster rollout times and bringing things onto the XPages. It has very good ideas and good UI as well as controls that can bring some specific functionality very fast.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Also, the next question is, are there any specific types of pilots that should not be done in XPages, or there's things you should avoid with an XPages pilot?
So generically for a pilot, I think you have to have something that has a reasonably good business commitment. Mid-size is ideal, not something that's very small. It won't convince that we figured out all the issues, nor should we take up something that's very large and very complex. those are things. And specifically coming to some domino applications, if there is significant external interfaces like third-party application interfaces, and those are things that are not ideally done in XPages. Of course, if an organization has a whole lot of such applications in its portfolio, it might be a different case. But for the most part, we should go for middle of the road in every sense, in terms of complexity, in terms of impact that we should use in a pilot. And Guy wants to add something.
Yeah, I would definitely add something. For a pilot, don't pick something that's highly critical, because this is probably the first time you're rolling it out. There are likely to be challenges no matter what you plan. So if you pick something that's extremely visible and extremely critical and business critical, even the smallest of things that if it goes wrong, it gets magnified like multifold, and all the time that you would end up spending would be on firefighting and fixing rather than really getting good data about how you succeeded, what you succeeded on, what kind of learnings you came up with. So yeah, as Venki says, both from a usage, also from complexity, picking something that's middle of the road is a good pilot.
Okay, excellent questions. We are out of time, and we have had the last question. So Venki and Gay, we do appreciate your webinar, and thank you for your time. Again, just a reminder to attendees that we will have the recorded session posted both on NotesCode and at Maarga Systems. Venki, the last word is yours, and thank you everyone for attending.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks for hosting it, and thanks everyone for attending. Here is wishing you the very best on your piloting journey on XPages. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Have a great day, everyone.